have Cecil Harris on. He is
Cecil.
a sports journalist. He's covered the U.S. Open, many other tennis championships, and he did write a book, Different Strokes, about the Williams sisters. And we're going to get into that in just a second. Cecil, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us about this.
Thank you very much, Rob. Good to be with you.
All right, so let's kick this around. So, growing up, did you always have love for sports, or how did all this come about?
Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and basically playing a variety of sports with friends. Basketball, we called it hardball because there weren't many grass fields in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn where I grew up. So we played baseball on concrete and called it hardball. And we played handball, track and field, just basically races and a variety of sports. And I grew up a big sports fan, just like all my friends. But I didn't grow as tall as they did, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise because I had to take academics a bit more seriously. And because I loved sports and I knew I was not going to be a professional athlete, I didn't have the size for it, except perhaps soccer, but I didn't go very far with soccer. Right. I decided to become a sports writer. So I chose Fordham University because I did some research when I was ready for college, and Fordham turned out a great many sports journalists. At one point, 4 of the 8 Yankees beat writers were Fordham graduates, including myself. And so I made the right choice and got excellent training to cover sports. But yeah, I've been a sports fan all my life, but I chose the right path because if you're writing about sports or talking about sports, you can do that a lot longer than someone who just plays.
What attracted you towards tennis and writing that? Because everybody thinks basketball, baseball, football, even soccer, hockey, if we want to even go down the list. But tennis is kind of, in my mind, and under that.
Yeah, I was in that same boat. In the early 1990s, I was assigned by Gannett newspapers in Westchester County, New York, to cover the U.S. Open. And I really enjoyed it. Basically, you have long days for 2 straight weeks, from basically 11 a.m. when the day session begins until after midnight when the night sessions end. And at that time, I'll give you an idea who was playing. John McEnroe was still playing. Martina Navratilova, Steffi Graf, Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi. Great players, but I had no emotional connection to any of them. It was just a good assignment. I enjoyed covering the U.S. Open every year from late August to mid-September. But it wasn't until 1994 when I found out about a 14-year-old girl from Compton, California named Venus Williams. Yeah. A Black girl is about to enter a predominantly white sport, a 14-year-old who is about to compete against grown women. And she's got a father, Richard Williams, who's telling everybody she's going to be the best in the world one day. That intrigued me enough to pay attention. So when Venus played her very first match as a professional, again, she's 14. She's playing in the Bank of the West Classic in the arena where the Golden State Warriors used to play, the Coliseum in Oakland, on Halloween night, 1994. I mean, I stayed up late to watch SportsCenter to find out what happened. And Venus won. And then she went on to play in her second match, the number 2 player in the world, Arantxa Sanchez Vicario, who had just won the U.S. Open. And I had covered that. So I was really intrigued. How is Venus at 14 going to do against the reigning U.S. Open champion? And Venus lost a tough 3-set match. And that got me hooked because obviously she has game. And she wasn't afraid. She didn't crack under the pressure. She was ahead of the number 2 player in the world, 6-2, 3-1, before Arantxa went to plan B and turned things around. So I knew then Venus was for real. And that made me get really interested in the Williams family. And I found out that Venus had a sister 15 months younger named Serena. Right. And Richard Williams was telling everybody Serena's going to be even better. So that took tennis for me from something that was just an assignment to a sport I began to follow very closely because I wanted to see how these Williams sisters would do. And the rest is history. They've become global sports icons.
I think of tennis, and I went to college in Boca Raton, and being there, obviously it's a very rich white area. Tennis is big down in South Florida in general. And growing up, not growing up there, but going to school there, I should say, it's basically at least from what I saw. I wasn't a tennis guy, but from what I saw, it being in South Florida in Boca Raton, going to college there, it was like a white people, older kind of crowd sport. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. You
No, you're
covered
right.
these things I did not.
You're right. I think that's part of the reason Richard Williams was not popular with the tennis community, because other tennis parents didn't talk about their kids that way. You know, Chris Everett became a great player from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Her parents were not outspoken, telling everyone how Chris is going to be the greatest player of all time. Pete Sampras's parents didn't do that. But that doesn't mean Richard Williams was wrong. It just means he was different. He was outspoken. And as he shared with me, he wanted to take pressure off Venus and Serena by putting the spotlight on him, because they could go on court and win, and they get the spotlight on them for winning. So he had a different strategy about it. And you're right, the tennis community, it's a predominantly white sport. It's a high income sport. The lessons are not cheap. So that is, people ask me, why aren't there more Black tennis players? Geography, aren't many tennis courts in Black neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Finances is the biggest reason. It's an expensive sport. And culture, in a sense that if your friends aren't playing tennis, it's less likely that you want to play tennis. You'll want to do what your friends are doing. So it's easier if you come from money, or you come from a family of financial means and all your friends are playing tennis, or your friend has a tennis court in the backyard. If you have that kind of upbringing, then you're likely to play tennis. So it was so unusual that Venus and Serena did not come from a tennis background, but Richard Williams saw potential to make a lot of money from the sport by teaching his daughters enough about tennis to attract the interest of prominent tennis coaches. And a guy named Rick Macy from Palm Beach, Florida, flew out to Compton to watch the girls play when they were teenagers. He saw the potential, and he helped move the family from Compton to Palm Beach, where they could play tennis every day.
Yeah. Can you go back into the book and talk about how they became such a successful story? And you even talked about earlier on in the answer that you go into these African-American neighborhoods, there is no tennis courts there. So how did all this get started?
Well, Richard Williams was watching TV on a Sunday afternoon, as so many men do, and he stumbled upon a tennis tournament. He was not a tennis fan, but he saw that a player named Virginia Ruzic of Romania won a tournament in Florida and was given a winner's check of $40,000. Mm-hmm. Now, this was mind-blowing to Richard Williams. All she had to do was play 1 week of tennis, and she got $40,000. So Richard had the idea of having his two youngest daughters become tennis players, Venus and Serena. So what he had to do, not being from a tennis background, is first sell his then wife, Oracene Price, on the idea. She went along with it. She was a nurse by trade. So what Richard Williams did is he went out and bought tennis books and VHS tapes to teach himself enough about tennis to teach his daughters. And he also took lessons from a guy he said was named Mr. Oliver in Compton. And according to Richard, Mr. Oliver wanted to be paid in whiskey, not money. so
hey,
Richard
works.
Whatever works, right? So Richard took his lessons from Mr. Oliver, paid him in whiskey, studied tennis books and videos, and taught his daughters. And then Richard started going around to prominent tennis coaches in Southern California to ask them to take a look at his daughters. And the movie King Richard brought that out very well. Richard Williams had a meeting with a guy named Vic Braden, who was a popular tennis coach and TV commentator at the time, but he didn't think, and again, the girls were so young, he didn't think that they were ready for someone like him to coach them, because he coached stars, and they weren't stars yet. But Richard kept trying, and eventually he attracted the attention of Rick Macy, who owns a tennis academy, still runs a tennis academy in Palm Beach, Florida. And he sent letters and some videos to Rick Macy. That intrigued Macy enough to fly out to Compton, go on the court where Venus and Serena would play every day. And he saw their talent. He saw their potential. And that set the wheels in motion for the Williams family to move to a tennis hotbed, Palm Beach, Florida. And that's how Venus was able to turn pro at 14, because once she got to Palm Beach, she could play tennis every day. You don't have to wait for the courts. The courts are there. Rick Macy would let them play at his tennis academy. And the same with Serena. So they were able to get very good very fast. And because they're so talented, they could play against each other. They could push each other, make each other better. And it wasn't a bitter sibling rivalry. It was, two girls, sisters who love each other, making each other better. So by the time 1994 came around, Venus turned pro. A year later, Serena turned pro. And really the rest is history. But it started with Richard Williams watching a tennis tournament on a Sunday afternoon. Imagine if he had been watching golf.
You never know. Maybe they would be golf stars. Who knows? The tables may have turned then.
Right.
Anyways, so my question is, though, and Cecil, we go into this, we talked about this. There's not a lot of Black athletes in tennis, period. Men's or women's for that matter. Who are they looking up to? Do they have a role model growing up to kind of mimic? I think that's important. We talk about this in politics and in sports, teaching, whatever it may be, for someone to look like you, be like you, and you can kind of hopefully mimic their good behaviors.
Yeah, the Williams sisters had Althea Gibson long before they actually met her. Althea Gibson was the first Black major tennis champion when it was an amateur sport in the 1950s. Althea broke the color barrier for Blacks in tennis. She won Wimbledon twice, 1957 and 1958, won the US Nationals twice, those same 2 years, won the French Nationals in 1956. Serena told me that when she was a student in school, she wrote a paper about Althea Gibson because her parents told them about Althea Gibson. So it wasn't until many years later that, Serena and Venus are on the tennis tour and Althea is watching them play as an older woman. But coming up, Richard Williams and Oracene Price at least let Venus and Serena know that they weren't the first. Yes, there weren't many, but Althea Gibson was a tennis champion. Then a decade later in the 1960s, Arthur Ashe came along and he won the first US Open in 1968, went on to win the Australian Open in 1970 and won Wimbledon in 1975. He's still the only Black man to win Wimbledon, which is the biggest tournament in the sport. So the Williams sisters had role models. They just didn't have role models that they could talk to and interact with until much later. And you're right, it did help them to know that other Black champions, at least two, came before them. And now for the generation of young Black girls and boys who play tennis, they look to Venus and Serena because they've grown up seeing, especially Serena, winning major championships for their entire young lives. They see it on TV all the time.
For the people that don't watch tennis, that are listening or watching this, what are the up-and-coming Black athletes that are playing, men and women, to watch out for in the tennis game?
Well, Naomi Osaka is still playing.
Right.
She's making more headlines now because of the whole mental health issue, because she has, I'm not a doctor, but she fits the profile of someone with social anxiety disorder. I first interviewed her 4 years ago at the Australian Open when I was working on this book. And I was struck by, how polite, intelligent, friendly she is, but very shy. And she's in a sport where the more you win, the more the media wants your attention, the more interviews you have to do, and it becomes mandatory. That's where the problems have come in for Naomi Osaka. I bring her up because her mother's Japanese, her father is Haitian. So
she's from Florida too, correct?
She lived in Florida for quite a while, Boca Raton, actually.
Yeah, I thought so, yeah.
Yeah, the Osakas, Naomi was born in Japan, Osaka, Japan, ironically enough. They moved to Elmont, New York, a suburb of New York City, and then went down to Boca Raton, Florida, where Naomi played a lot at the Chris Everett Academy. Yeah. It's the Everett Tennis Academy, they call it, where Chris and her brother John run it. So she's a Black player who idolized Serena and has won 4 major titles, 2 US Opens, 2 Australian Opens. But the thing about Naomi is the more successful she is, the more other people put demands on her. We want your time. We want you to do these mandatory interviews before every tournament, after every match. And she's not comfortable with that. And that has led to problems with her dealing with the mental health aspect of the sport. There's also Sloane Stevens, a Black woman who won the U.S. Open in 2017. She's still on the tour. And there are up-and-coming Black players like Coco Gauff. She was just in the French Open final a couple of weeks ago. She's only 18. Haley Baptiste is another one to look out for. Alicia Parks, Asia Muhammad. There are more young Black girls in the pipeline coming up who grew up idolizing the Williams sisters. I don't want to give short shrift to Taylor Townsend, who was the #1 ranked junior in the world when she was 16. She's now 24 and playing on tour. So there are other Black players. There just aren't many Black male players. The best.
Why do you feel that is, though, Cecil?
I think there's so many other choices for men. You can play football, you can play basketball, you can do boxing, MMA, track and field. There are more Blacks going into hockey. I mean, the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, I was looking at the New York Rangers and their run. They have, Keandre Miller, a 20-year-old defenseman. So obviously, he didn't grow up thinking about tennis. He grew up in Canada playing hockey. And Ryan Reeves, another Black player. So young men and teenage boys have more options. With girls, they look at tennis as the most successful sport in the world for women because it's the one where you can make the most money.
Right.
And, if you're a Black girl and you're watching tennis, and, you've seen Venus and Serena winning major titles. Naomi Osaka told me when I interviewed her that when she was in the 3rd grade, her teacher gave the class an assignment, write about the person you admire most. And Naomi, and in the 3rd grade, wrote her paper about Serena Williams. And now she's doing the same thing Serena's doing, successful on the court and also emerging as a businesswoman. She's going to start her own sports talent agency.
So as we keep going into this, we talk about umpires in tennis. It seems like they're all white. We've talked about this early on in the interview. So it's not breaking news for anybody listening to this. But why do you feel like there's really no African-American umpires in tennis? There's been very few, if any, I believe.
The short answer, and it's a perplexing one, Rob, is the USTA, the U.S. Tennis Association, the sport's national governing body, has basically run off the most qualified Black tennis umpires they've had. I mean, only one African-American umpire has officiated a U.S. Open singles final. That was a woman named Sandy French in 1993. She did a fine job. And, they say in sports, an umpire or a referee does a great job when you don't notice them. So she officiated the match. Steffi Graf won the U.S. Open in 1993. Sandy French was the umpire. The following year, she shows up at the U.S. Open and they demoted her from the umpire's role when you sit in the high chair to the line umpire. And she asked, why am I being demoted? And she was told by the supervisor of officials, well, you didn't deserve to work that final last year.
Wow.
Which was just bizarre. And Sandy French and another Black umpire named Cecil Hollins, who's now an administrative law judge in Queens, New York. He left tennis altogether. They filed a racial discrimination suit against the U.S. Tennis Association because Cecil Hollins had a gold badge. When you get a gold badge, you're qualified to officiate any tennis match in the world. And how it works is, I can tell you briefly, your country's tennis federation has to send you to umpires school. And you start out with a white badge, then bronze, silver, gold being the highest. So Cecil Hollins had the highest ranking of any umpire, but he still never got a chance to work a U.S. Open singles final. They just never gave him the opportunity. Years later, Tony Nimmons, another Black umpire who got up to the silver badge level and was trying to get the USTA to sponsor him for gold badge school so he could get there. They wouldn't do it. And they ended up firing him. So he filed a racial discrimination suit. So that's where the subtitle of my book, Serena, Venus, and the Unfinished Black Tennis Revolution comes from, because there have been Black men and women, and there still are, who aspire to be umpires at the highest level, to work the US Open, Wimbledon, French Open, Australian Open, but they're not getting the opportunity.
So Cecil, is this something like the Masters where, the only, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe they don't let women in
They've changed that. Well, Condoleezza Rice, the former Secretary of State, is now a member of Augusta National, but they went out and found
That
a
seems
high
like
profile.
that's like a political thing. That's like a scam.
Yeah. But
But
for
they
years
don't
they didn't have women in the club. They didn't have black men in the club at Augusta.
Until Tiger Woods came on the scene, or before?
Well, he helped. He helped by becoming the dominant player in the sport. It really looked bad. Every year, everyone's going to Augusta National and to watch Tiger Woods, win or come very close to winning. But it's a club with no women members, no black male members. So they eventually, found high-profile people to bring in. But tennis has been a closed shop in America in a similar way, because there are qualified black men and women who want to work major tennis finals, but they weren't given the opportunity. And that's why there have been 2 racial discrimination lawsuits filed against the USTA. And the second one was filed by Tony Nimmons, and he told me that the general counsel of the USTA said to him, what we do when people file suits against us is we bury them in paperwork until they're willing to accept pennies on the dollar to go away. So nothing has been done to even change the situation. The U.S. Open's coming up, the end of August, and I'd be shocked if you see a African-American umpire officiating a big match, because they just don't assign them. And there's no rhyme or there's no good reason for it. There never has been a good reason for it. It just continues. And now we're in 2022, and Sandy French, 29 years ago, is still the only African-American umpire to officiate a U.S. Open final. It's a disgrace.
How do we kind of change the dynamics of tennis as far as that goes, and try to get it on a more equal playing field, whether it's with African Americans, whether it's lower income whites, Asians, Native American, whatever it may be, Hispanics, to try to get more people to play the sport, because we may have some good stories out there and some good players that aren't just rich white people and playing English.
Well, we need more tennis courts in areas where there are no tennis courts. Where I grew up in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, I didn't see a tennis court in my neighborhood. So naturally, I wasn't going to grow up playing tennis. Tennis was just something I saw on TV, then became a sports writer, something I was assigned to cover without having any emotional connection. We need more places like the Excess Tennis Village. I write about it in the book. Sloane Stephens, who won the 2017 U.S. Open, is coached by a man named Kamal Murray, who grew up in Chicago and grew up playing tennis. He wanted to play basketball, but the summer basketball programs are all filled. All the slots were filled. Tennis was available. His parents said, play tennis. So fortunately, that's how he got into tennis and became a successful coach. And there was a notorious housing project on the south side of Chicago that the city just bulldozed. The way to deal with, the crime is just have everybody move out and knock down the housing project. So the land was available. He outbid many people to get the land because he wanted to build a tennis facility on that site, and he did. And it's called XS Tennis Village. It's on the south side of Chicago, where Michelle Obama grew up, for example, where if you remember the song Bad, Bad Leroy Brown, there's a line, the south side of Chicago is the baddest part of town. So it's a good song. Yeah, it's Jim Croce, his classic song, Bad, Bad Leroy Brown. So I went to Chicago, to the south side, to see XS Tennis Village for myself. And it's a beautiful facility. It's got 28 courts, indoor and outdoor courts. And Kamal Murray is a world-class coach. He's got a U.S. Open champion on his resume. He's got other great coaches working with him. And he made a deal with the University of Chicago, which is about a mile away. Students from the University of Chicago come to the XS Tennis facility to tutor the students. So they can get tennis instruction, and it's not it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. There are some tennis academies in Florida that charge $80,000 a year per child. It's $80,000, and that's just tennis instruction. There's no way most
going to college.
And all you're learning tennis, right? At these facilities. At XS Tennis Village, the tennis lessons start at $80. And there's a sliding scale for families that, have trouble paying that fee, but they pay what they can afford. And it's such a success story going on there in the South Side of Chicago that when I visited on a Saturday in December, there were as many kids there from the suburbs whose parents found out about the success of Excess Tennis Village. They drive on the Dan Ryan Expressway. For people who know Chicago, there's an exit. You take that exit and you're just minutes away from the Excess Tennis Village. It's got a lot of parking, and it was a December day, so everyone was getting their tennis instructions indoors. And it's a way to bring tennis to the masses by building a facility like that. Chicago has it. I think every major city with a multi-ethnic population, let's say, should have something like Excess Tennis Village, and it's a great thing where you see Black and white kids from different parts of Chicago. They're playing together. They're learning together. They're coming up together. And Kamal's had success stories. One of his players got a 4-year tennis scholarship to the University of Notre Dame.
Wow.
We need more facilities like that in America. So it's not just a country club sport for the rich. It's a sport where many people can play it. And I contend, Rob, I think one of the biggest reasons we haven't had an American man win a major tennis title since Andy Roddick won the US Open in 2003 is that the pool of tennis talent is too shallow among the men. There just aren't enough guys who grew up liking tennis and have the talent to win major titles. You can like it. You can be from a rich family where money is no object. You can have the finest coaches, but if you don't have the talent or the hunger, you're not going to become a champion.
As we go to the end against Cecil, let's talk about the book. Where can people get it? What do you hope that people get out of the book when they do read it, though?
I hope people will find out how extraordinary the Williams family is. Basically, they're the most successful siblings in the history of sports. Venus and Serena have combined for 30 major tennis titles in singles, 23 for Serena, 7 for Venus. They've combined for 14 major doubles titles. They're 14-0 in Grand Slam doubles finals. They've combined for 9 Olympic medals, 5 for Venus, 4 for Serena. And this was really a successful family project. Richard Williams had the vision. He got his wife at the time, Oracene Price, to buy in. And fortunately, the girls, Venus and Serena, loved tennis. They didn't burn out. They didn't get sick and tired of it. They worked hard at it, and they've become global stars. So I tell that story in depth. I also get into the history of Blacks in tennis. There was, there still is, the American Tennis Association. It started in 1916. Prominent Black business leaders started it because tennis was segregated. The established tennis association, the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association at the time, didn't accept Black membership. So it was similar to Negro League Baseball. You start your own league, and the ATA still exists, but that is how far Blacks had to go in America to play tennis. They had to start their own association because the establishment would not let them in. I tell that story as well. I get into the high cost of tennis and how what Kamal Murray is doing on the South Side of Chicago should be the model for the entire country. And it's a book that I'm proud of because I get into the history of the sport, the economics of the sport, and it's built around Venus and Serena, the two most successful Black tennis players of all time. And they've inspired now 2 generations of players because Venus is 42 and Serena's 40. They haven't retired yet, but clearly they're in the twilight, yet they've inspired so many others to want to play tennis.
Yeah. And it's great. And people should read the book. Where can people get the book and follow you also?
Well, I have a website, cecilharrisbooks.com. You can follow me there. The book is available on Amazon and at major bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever you can buy books. If you don't see it on the shelf, you ask the bookseller and they will order it because the book is available. So there are many ways to get it, and I hope people take advantage of that.
Right. CecilHarrisBooks.com. Definitely check it out. Are you on any social media platforms, Cecil?
Oh, yes. I'm on Facebook, Twitter as Cecil H. Author.
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn. And eventually I'll get on Instagram, but I'm not on yet.
Hey, you're on enough. But again,
Yeah.
CecilHarrisBooks.com. Definitely check it out. Cecil, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I look forward to doing more of these conversations with you. There's so many good sports stories and so much sports news in general out there for us to really discuss. And you are the man that's written for all these great newspapers and has that knowledge of sports. So I'm looking forward to more of these conversations. So thanks so much, Cecil.
You're welcome, Rob. I enjoyed it. I look forward to speaking with you again.